Hello, and welcome to PEP, which stands for Passion, Empowerment, and Perseverance. I'm your host, Graham Salinger, president and founder of Salinger Coaching Solutions, where we empower people and empower success. My guest today is the one, the only, Phil Cardarella. He is a writer and editor for Aerospace Industries Association, and he works with their policy and legislative affairs teams to share their accomplishments, goals, and stories for AIA and their members. Phil also works directly with AIA president and CEO as his speechwriter. Prior to coming to AIA, Phil spent more than 3 years in the U.S. Senate, serving as the speechwriter for then Senator Barbara Mikulski and Senator Amy Klobuchar. If in these roles, Phil wrote and edited full-length remarks, op-eds, talking points, video scripts, statements, social media content, and other communication documents. In addition to his time in the Senate, Phil has worked on a variety of campaigns, from local school boards to city council races to President Barack Obama's re-election campaign, where he had the distinct honor of living with my great aunt for a period of time. In addition to that's a fun fact. Another fun fact is that, like me, Phil has a bachelor's in political science from American University School of Public Affairs. And in addition to that, he has an MA in political communications, again, from American University School of Public Affairs. Welcome to the program, Phil. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I would just like to say the best part about this is I am the one and only Phil Cardarella, except for the other one in my immediate family. My father's name is also Phil Cardarella.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Right about this. No.
I didn't know that, Junior.
No, we didn't rehearse that part.
Okay. No worries. Well, I'm talking to the right one. I sent my emails to the right guy. All right, great. Yeah, Phil, I like to start off my conversations. As I said, my coaching practice fundamentally works with both leaders of organizations and their teams through a specific way of the lens that I use is empowering people's passions, purpose, and perseverance. And so I start the show by asking my guests what sort of sparked their passion for the world that they exist in and professionally. So I read your bio, but I want to hear from you what got you sort of into political communication and more broadly speech writing.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is I grew up in a family that was involved with politics. Since before I was born, my mom was actually a local politician in Kansas City, Missouri, Catherine Shields. City council member, county executive. I think my first political communications job was actually sleeping on her lap, not actually sleeping, pretending to sleep during one of her political ads for county executive. So from the very beginning, I was willing to, I guess, I would say, play with the edges of ethics when it came to political communication. She assured me that I was very convincing as a sleeping child. But the honest answer is like that. Growing up in that environment instilled a passion for not just talking, but talking for a reason. I'm a big talker, but I think I'm more emotional when it gets to there's a cause or purpose that is behind it. If we're talking about political communication and speech writing in general, probably one of my first was I did obviously speech and debate when I was younger, but I actually had a professor a teacher in high school who looked at me, excuse me, one day in frustration and said, "Phil, your papers, they all sound like you want to say them out loud." And like there's a degree that is actually the style of writing that it comes to me, and it is kind of pushed me in the direction of speech writing in general. As we met at AU, those kind of combined. It's not a rare thing at American University to meet a bunch of peers of people who want to go and do good things for the world, and all those experiences just combined. I think that is when you find your passion is not just something that you like doing, but that you're good at doing too, right? That's where something can really, the combination of those two things really drives a passion. I guess maybe you could be passionate about stuff you're not good at, but I don't know. I don't actually know anyone who's passionate about things they're not good at yet, or things they don't like have a drive to become good at it. So those are the experiences of my life that that really pushed me to this area. I'll be honest, I also didn't do great on my LSAT score, so that helped push me away from the lawyer path too. So that did
Got
help.
it. So you knew you wanted to be in politics, you knew you wanted to be in policy, but you also figured out lawyer wasn't going to be the right path, so you went with speech writing instead. Okay.
Yeah, it works out. I think there's a reality of like passion is, as like I said, something you're good at, something you're interested in, but also like what life throws at you and being able to, there are going to be paths that are cut off in you. It's finding those other things for the paths that are available.
Right. So what would you say, because you were able to pivot and you mentioned, politics, speaking for purpose, what would you say is sort of the overall arc in terms of the purpose that you find yourself in that draws you to certain things?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my purpose is to help push for good causes that I find important through my skills.
Okay.
So it's not just writing for the sake of writing, is writing for a good cause. I think I even have in my cover letter something along the lines of do some good work and work to do some good, right? And that's kind of the basis.
Right. Excellent. Awesome. Yeah, having a mantra is a good way of falling back as well. So yeah, you mentioned having a high school teacher that talked about your papers and the way that you wrote. So my next question is actually about mentorships and relationships that you've found valuable. I've found that most of my interviews on this show, somebody inevitably brings up relationships. My coaching practice, we really help people focus on doing their jobs in a way that honor and foster productive and healthy relationships and retaining those relationships. And so a lot of times in my program, we just inevitably bring up the ways in which relationships also set people up for success and lay those foundations. So who have been some people in your life who've been important sort of in guiding you, and what did you get from those relationships?
Yeah, I think there's probably more for the career path focus post high school. Obviously, everyone had a teacher who inspired them. People had parents who are, help them get to where they are. But it's, I've always found that certainly starting in college, it was not just the professors, the deans, whatever, but it was my peers also who helped set me up a path of success. I think we talk about mentors a lot. But we don't necessarily talk as much about how our peers can help us set up for success as well. I got my first job out of college because a friend of mine, who's even younger than me actually, helped me get an internship that led to an internship that led to a full-time job, right? Working on President Obama's reelection campaign. But like, that's how it happened. It was just because of that friend who asked if I wanted to go do that, right? So I guess when I think about this, I also have mentors. Like I have speech writing professors. I have people in my field who I've talked to who have helped mentor. I have bosses that have pushed me away. But I think we talk about, that's not the interesting thing. It is interesting. It's great. But I feel we don't talk enough about our peers, the people who aren't, above us in a career and could even be below us in a career, but how those other people who are in the same level as you can really help drive you forward, whether it's encouragement, opportunities, or just like, it's the friendship is a thing that's not only good for you, it can be good for your career, I guess is what I'm saying.
Sure.
And that's probably, this is not obviously a new thesis, right? We're in Washington, D.C. It's kind of like the mantra of Washington, D.C.
Network. Yeah.
Yeah, but like networks are good, friendships are better, right?
Sure.
And remembering that I think is important for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have networks, but at least in the DC context and other spaces, people have networks, but people don't always know best practices for like activating those and like blurring the lines between professional and like people they know, or they're like weary of like reaching out to this person. What would you say to somebody who what networking advice would you give to somebody in terms of working that career angle?
So I think developing friendships is best. Obviously, it's awkward. Like networking's awkward. Like that's the thing. You like it's a combination. Like, but it's like building friendships that are kind of awkward too, right? Like, think about the idea of going up to a stranger in any context and talking to them, whatever the situation, is kind of weird. And I think it's just one of those things that, as I preach here, I also think I'm not great at networking. I also like, I know it's good for me. And even people who recognize it's good for us, right, aren't always great or do it as often as we should. And the answer just continues to be reach out, like especially in professional development area, like everyone has gotten somewhere because of someone, because of a relationship. And the good people out there pay it forward. The vast majority of people are good people in terms of that aspect, right? They're not gonna and I guess the other aspect of this is like, you send an email to someone you're hoping to connect with, the worst case scenario, they don't respond.
Right.
Right. Like this is one of the things that we all have to teach us. But it's putting yourself out there. So it's not easy emotionally, right? In whatever the setting, but it is something we just have to all push ourselves to do more.
Well, thank you for not making me twist your arm to get you on the show. Speaking of networking.
I mean, I'll be honest, I probably wasn't the easiest person to organize, but yeah, no, of course. See, friendship,
there we go.
Connection.
So I want to shift a little bit away from, and thank you for naming that. It's not always the mentors, the direct sort of professional people, but it's also just other aspects of relationships that are important. So I want to talk about specific professional relationships that you have had, because being in your specific work and some of the people that you've worked for in your career in the Senate and also in the corporate world, you've been surrounded by people who are at the top of their game in terms of professionally, whatever, both in the corporate world as a CEO or as a senator, and as a presidential candidate, after that as well. So I'm wondering, what are some leadership skills or characteristics that you've observed or picked up from folks you've surrounded yourself? What are some effective leadership skills that you've seen from either the senators you work for or from your current work?
Yeah, I mean, so basically what makes good leaders in these areas, right, is right? Like what are the aspects about them?
Right.
So I think that what you see in some of the most successful people who are, whether good leaders as in policy or action, good leaders in terms of mentors, all these, is just a willingness to be open about the people around them. So I think there are a lot of people who, and a lot of these positions, rightfully so, are very intelligent, top of their class, right? And I think that what separates some of the best leaders and others from those who are not as good are recognizing that sometimes other people could be right too. Other people might have good ideas as well. Maybe my initial thoughts are not necessarily the best of all. And that's what you've seen from some of the best leaders, is a recognition of that potential. They are, some of our best leaders are very self-assured in themselves. And honestly, they should be. They've gotten to amazing ranks in our society, right? It is the difference between those who are still open to the idea that sometimes other people can have good ideas, and bring those people in, right? It's not just accepting the idea that somewhere someone could be good, have a good idea. It's opening up your, I don't want to say entourage, but that's not the right word, but group of people you're interacting with, to people who could disagree with you, who may have different thoughts, different views, or way of reacting to things. I think that's a big quality. I'll also say this, speaking from an employee, it's those who are also who recognize I think this probably connects with the value of those who are working for them, and empower those people to really show that value. That's the better way of my rambling, how to summarize my rambling.
So both having humility, but then also really bringing out the values that different team members have.
Yeah, recognizing yes, I think that's fine. Yeah.
Right. Have you, it strikes me that being in the DC world, those things that you just said are like really amazing and really rich. I'm gonna, I guess, push you a little bit and wonder if how that culture plays out in the DC world.
I think like you mean like, so what I'm describing and how like often it's successful or how often
Yeah.
it appears. The honest answer is I think for many people, and this is, I think they recognize you can only get so far on your own as well.
Mm-hmm.
So at a certain level, I think there are people who use the most successful leaders that we have are those who take advantage of the full potential of the people around them, right? Empower them, because they are a very impressive people, but they're still people. There's only so much you can do as an individual. So those who really want to accomplish things, and there are definitely, thankfully, no one I've worked for, leaders who I don't actually think are that interested in accomplishing things. They just have leadership positions and don't want to accomplish things. So this doesn't apply to them, but if you do want to accomplish real impressive feats at the level that we're talking about, you have to do this to at least some degree.
Okay. Yeah, and I think another aspect of leadership, in terms of like the work that I do with team coaching, really, and you mentioned the word empowerment too, right? It's about empowering leaders to communicate, and you mentioned values, right? You want to communicate your values, your goal, and your vision in a way that connects with other people and the team and empowers the team and employees to act in alignment with that purpose. And so the leader has to be able to articulate it in order to create some level of alignment. So I'm curious, as somebody whose job is communicating and crafting message for the CEO, can you speak a little bit about the importance in terms of leaders play in setting the tone for an organization and for organizational culture to be successful?
Yeah, the honest answer is everything that is about the organization. Any message that you want from the organization needs to come from the leader itself, right? It rings hollow otherwise. And you've seen this year, and certainly the last 4 years, but just in the last few weeks, messages from CEOs of every level, right? And senators and well, not so much the president, but senators and members of Congress in general, and like leaders everywhere making statements. It's not just about putting out a statement, right? There is value to doing that as a leader of a community, as a leader of a district, as a leader of an organization, right? The tone you are setting there is what the people who are either your voters or employees or whatever it would be, they're who you listen. You are the voice they listen to. And if it's not coming from you, these values and morals or whatever the organization or institution that you represent, then how can anyone believe those, right? And it's just, they're incapable of doing that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's one of the reasons why we saw such backlash to the president's lack of a strong statement against the attacks on the Capitol for so long. Even members of his party have spoken out against this. And the reason for that is, how can we take these messages seriously if the leaders are not actually standing up and expressing those values as well? Now, Bram, if you're going to follow up on that, I guess probably the other thing is not just statements though, right? There has to be actual actions that back those up as well.
Right.
And your other actions, your other statements can't undermine what your new statement.
Well, and that's where alignment comes in, right? I might be coaching somebody who they have a CEO who just came in and nailed the interview because they said all the right things, but maybe their management style is not actually matches what they're saying, or they are all of a sudden there's some kind of mission drift, and so what they're saying and what they're doing aren't the same. And so my follow-up is just, I know that a lot of your work is helping to share the accomplishments and goals of AIA, and I'm sort of wondering from a communications perspective, and you talked about sort of values, but can you talk about how important messaging is in terms of creating goals, but also making sure that there is goal alignment with actual organizational achievement and work?
Sure. The organizations are different sizes, and so this is true for depending on the size of your group, right? Mm-hmm. If you're in a box of an office with the head and a comms person and whatever the ledge or whatever outreach or whatever it would be, the three of you together, it's kind of hard for telephone to get in the way of those kind of communications, right? But the actual answer is with any sizable organization or office, key messaging is important, because the reason telephone is a fun game for kids is how fun the results can end up being at the end of 20 people trying to say the same message to each other, right? And whether you're the head of an organization trying to lay out the values and making sure your VPs and your directors and everyone also are laying out those values, or you're a member of the United States House of Representatives and you're saying the message you want to get across in this interview, and then this interview, and then this interview, and then this interview, right, it does not get through all the way to everyone you want unless everybody at every point is in alignment. I actually think to go away from political speech writing, for example, to political ads, I was the assistant director for AU's Campaign Management Institute. And we used to talk about how for political ads, it's not until someone sees an ad for the 10th time that they actually internalize the messaging behind it, right? And this is, again, about repetition is very important in communication work, but you can't have good repetition unless you have good alignment of that messaging as well.
That's really interesting. I'm wondering how that connects to management. If you're managing a company, how many times do you have to get people in your culture on board with a given topic? Or
well, and think about it this way, the reality is it's every time people come in and out of the organization. So not just when the CEO comes in and out and changes things up, right? But every time a new VP comes in, every time a new director, every level of person, right? New person to learn the messaging, and potentially a new person that needs to learn the messaging because they will be sharing the messaging even more.
Right. What is, so I'm going to turn the conversation process-wise. What is your process in terms of working with your CEO in terms of creating messaging and disseminating that? What does that look like from a practical standpoint?
Yeah, so I do a general speech writing push for all of the people I've worked for.
Sure.
There is a focus on learning someone's voice, right? Working with them to find that voice and what they're comfortable with, and finding value. This is kind of obviously value in terms of there's products you're providing, but internalized as an employee, as a staffer, finding value in what they found valuable, right? So a lot of young speechwriters, they think of themselves as young poets, or if you've seen The West Wing, Sam Seaborn, right? Sam Seaborn is an absurd character. His job doesn't exist. He's national security expert, policy expert, great prose speechwriter, and there's nothing real about that position, right? But one of the reasons you think of that is because his words end up on the paper and then what you say, and the answer is that's very rarely true. It's exactly what you put on paper is exactly what comes out. And that is a very important part of the process for everyone to read, whether you're a policy expert that, you've brought up all these talking points or these points that you think are really important to this critical, and your boss only takes a couple of them to the speechwriter. I remember my first experience in the Senate, actually. I was there at an event with Barbara Mikulski. And I had spent a week. I was brand new to the office. I'd spent a week working on this speech, and it was like great. I had added a story about how she connected to one of the organizers of the event. I brought everything, and she gets up there to give the speech, and she doesn't say a single word I write for like the first 5 minutes. And I'm just like heartbroken, right? Because this is my first event. It was the first time writing for a US senator.
Right.
And then suddenly she stops and then looks down at her paper and reads off the story about her connection with the organizer. She had found that valuable. So again, there is a whole process of talking with them, finding what they're comfortable with, but also remembering they're not going to use that, and seeing what they actually use to redo your whole process and relearn, like, now what does that tell me about what I should do next time? So it's like an ever-growing process. And I would also say that the reality is senators, members, CEOs, everyone are human beings, and our preferences change as human beings all the time. Right. So sometimes like you'll go back to like what you were doing 3 months ago, and then you'll suddenly go away from that. That's not something we want to do. And the answer is that's completely understandable, because they're the ones going out and doing this. They're speaking out for the organization, for the business, for the country, whatever it would be. They need to be comfortable, and your process needs to be about making them comfortable.
Sure. I think I just finished reading Obama's first volume, and he sort of writes about how when Yes We Can came about, he like looked at Axelrod and he's like, that's cheesy, it's never going to work. All right. Yeah. It worked pretty well.
Hey, and also an example of trust the people like outside of yourself, right? Empower them, let them make you better.
Right. And the other one was that like Fire Up Ready to Go just came from like a campaign event, and some local person was shouting that, and he like ran with it. So that's
there was, I believe it was South Carolina. The African American, I believe the story is the African American woman in South Carolina on the front row just started like basically starting the chant, and like everyone started it, and it just became a national sensation because that's what Barack Obama does.
Right. All right. So you're more like a Toby Ziegler of the West Wing than anybody else.
I'm not. The actual answer is no one should actually use the West Wing as an example of honestly real life, but certainly real political life.
Fair enough.
Actually, I will say this, this is a fun aside.
Sure.
The only thing about real political life is like the frustration of how little gets done. We don't talk about this in the West Wing. Almost nothing gets done in like 7 years. There is no large agenda, right? And that incrementalism is actually probably the most accurate part of government.
Right. That's funny. So, and I, one of the things that I did want to talk about is, as I sort of mentioned, and it actually connects with the idea of pace, incrementalism, right? Is that the pace of things change, right? Whether you're in government, whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in the nonprofit sector, and as somebody who coaches people through, I mentioned it's passion and purpose and perseverance. The last thing about perseverance is like, how do you work through the pace of change when there are curveballs or things that aren't working well? Obviously, coming to you at a very unique time. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There are a lot of unforeseen challenges. And I'm sure that in your work, whether at the corporate level or in government, that you've had experience where there have been challenges that nobody saw coming, or that they saw coming but didn't have the right antidote for. And so I'm curious about, in your experience, what are some important things that you've seen leaders do to address those issues in general? And what do you think, what would be some takeaways in terms of things that leaders can do to help others overcome unanticipated obstacles to success or growth?
So I think this goes back to when you create an environment that has different views and different expertise, and trusting and empowering those individuals helps dramatically when it comes to unforeseen crises, right? It generally because it is, we know for a fact that diversity of backgrounds, experiences, and viewpoints, right, improves like output of everything, whether it's talking about policy or getting things done on business level. Like it just is the case, right? And that means responding to crises as well. So I think empowering those diverse experiences around you is a critical part of this. I think flexibility is another piece of this. It is, you will not succeed probably your first time responding to something as much as you'd like, right? We are in the midst of a pandemic, and messaging around that for everyone has improved over time. Mm-hmm. Right? No one was like, no one knew what this would mean at any point, certainly to this level at first, right? But as time goes by, you learn through, I want to say failure, because like this is kind of like the hokey thing, is like it's okay to fail, right? But It's not failure either, right? It's just mistakes or learning to improve. It's kind of like what I was talking about with that constant rehashing of the process of what happened. I think not exit meetings, that means when someone is being let go, but like after an event or an action or whatever you're concerned about, having a meeting to talk about what went well, what went wrong, what can we do better. I think those kind of reflection and continuing to improve the process is critical, especially in things like these long-term crises that is a global pandemic, right? Like this is unlike, God, how many times have we said this? This is unlike anything we've ever experienced, right? But there are lessons in this for what are, God willing, smaller crises than what we are experiencing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so the silver lining is anything that happens after COVID is going to feel like small potatoes in terms of getting things done, to a degree.
Knock on wood.
Right. Yeah, I hope. Yeah, how has COVID been for you? Personally, professionally, like this. Yeah, how is Phil in the age of COVID?
So I think this actually, if I'm talking about leadership,
sure.
is one way that how you respond to your employees in COVID is a great way. Providing that flexibility, creating an environment. I'm working from home right now. I'm very fortunate and privileged to be doing so. There's a lot of people who don't have that opportunity, right? But we've seen from leaders across the country expanding the ability of remote work during a time for crisis. And I think we're going to see that kind of flexibility again continue on. I don't think it's just the fact that more people are going to be wearing masks more often after this crisis is like, whatever over will mean, right? There are going to be other aspects of this. We're going to see more flexibility for remote work, which will probably do good things for a lot of, especially parents, a number of people, caretakers. You're going to see that flexibility become more common. And the thing that you can, like, leaders need to jump on board, right? Because the reality is that, especially when you're coming from a workforce perspective, you're thinking about the long-term goals of your organization, jumping on that idea of flexibility, making it easier for your workers is going to attract the best talent.
Right.
And that's, is the best time. You have the built-in excuse to do this kind of flexibility now.
Right.
Make it a norm now, so that it becomes a continual benefit for your organization going forward.
Right. I mean, historically, shocks to the labor forces in the market or to the economy have sort of forced leaders into positions where like new things have started to come about. And so it does mean different things for leaders in terms of what kind of entrepreneurship are we going to see? How is it going to shape the way that we relate to labor and workers and things like that? So
It's going
yeah.
to be leadership. I don't not redefine, but like what good leaders are in our society and how we judge that is going to be different 3 years from now in terms of organizational leadership.
Right.
What's expected.
Sure. I had a follow-up, but I lost it. That's okay. Yeah, so I think one of the next question is just what has been like an aha moment for your, diverting a little bit, but in your career overall, we talked about kind of aha moments from COVID, but overall, absent of COVID, what have been some major sort of moments in your profession in terms of aha, like learning and.
Yeah, I think, I mean, honestly, the story I told right earlier about there's this moment you're like, oh, maybe it's not about me writing the next great American speech. It's about providing your principal, your boss, your leader with the product they need. And that is kind of, excuse me, that was in a pivotal growth moment for me in my career. Gosh, man, I used the perfect story earlier. This is like save your best stories for later. Like that's the key
towards the end of the speech.
Yeah, it's absolutely wrap up with the best story. I think they're maybe not aha moments, but I'll do an inverse of this. I think also sure. Like so I talked about like how recognizing that that your words are not necessarily prophetic, that they you need to be willing to edit. I think also there's value, and I've learned that I've had the pleasure of working with offices that range from the size of 2 people to 50 people, right? And when you're working for an executive or a senator or whoever candidate, it is all everyone's job is to make that person look good, to help them promote the message, to help them use their platform to push the cause. And being able to not just recognize that fact in yourself, but diplomatically teaching that to others in your organization is also an essential part. It's not just not being the person that thinks they're the Sam Seaborn. It's making sure you can help others recognize that they're not the Sam Seaborn. And that's kind of been, and it's not I don't mean that as like a hit on anybody. No one is that person, right? And recognizing what reality is versus like, I think, media portrayal of different things that we do in our life, which is a whole other thesis that we could dive down.
Sure.
But we're not going to. But like those are the moments over the career. I think that's the aha like lesson that I've learned of this, is not just recognizing myself, but like, and diplomatically, because the other answer is no one's going to appreciate you telling them that they're not Sam Seaborn. Right. Like no one likes that. Everyone wants to be Sam Seaborn, at least in the earlier seasons. But there's going to be a lot of people who've watched the West Wing who like these references, and people who have never seen it are not going to get half of this recording. But it is like diplomatically and empathetically helping your coworkers, along in this and other aspects, I think is one of the best skills you can also, and lessons. And I think that applies to your leaders as well, right? Mm-hmm. It's not great to say, this is crud, how dare you? It's, helping with helpful edits and nurturing and empowering the people around you.
Sure. Maybe I can simplify the Sam Seaborn for people who aren't familiar. There's a really good book that actually a lot of the things you're talking about are similar. It's Jim Collins. It's called From Good to Great. And he talks about this concept, which is the hedgehog concept, which is that in organizations, it's an old Greek, I think it's a Greek story about a fox versus a hedgehog. And the fox was very clever and did a billion things. And the hedgehog basically just like put their body together and was spiny, and that was enough to beat the fox. And so the idea of that story is like, be super good at one thing, know what that one thing is, and then just like cultivate around doing that one thing really well. So in other words,
Yeah.
you can't be Sam Seaborn the fox and just do like everything under the sun, because realistically, maybe it's better to just find your purpose, find your passion, and do that and cultivate that, but also help cultivate that among others.
And I think this is probably a trait, especially for those of us who are young white cis men. There's a reality of like, we are not always an ideal in everything that we're doing, right? Is that recognition, but also, as you're saying, like maybe not one thing, but don't try to do everything. And certainly you are not going to do everything well.
Right.
So like that is
and it goes to your institutional and organizational diversity point earlier, right? Your teams are stronger when you have people that are diverse, both in terms of worldview, culture, and values, but also in skills, so that you can have 10 different hedgehogs in the organization that are really good at their one thing. But then I also say like that probably makes sense with communication too, right? Because there are probably people that are super smart and super, I'm going to use an AUDC word, so sorry, wonky, but they haven't honed in on communicating it in one effective way, because they're saying 20 different things about, if Paul Krugman wrote a speech, it might be hard for people to like know what was going on. Versus
maybe I'm not here to judge specifically Paul Krugman's speech writing ability. But yeah, like I think you used a word earlier, which I think is probably best, which is have humility in yourself. Like that is probably the I don't know, the professional lesson of all professional lessons.
Great. Thank you. All right. Final thought. The inauguration is tomorrow. Joe Biden is going to give a speech at a time when resiliency is going to be a point of conversation, I would think. What would you hope that he is going to talk about from a speechwriter's point of view? What are you looking for tomorrow?
Got it. Well, I do know it's tomorrow. Hold on, let me see if I can get this. You'll see back there, right here, is actually a countdown that we've had till inauguration for a while now. Right to the left of my way too old Christmas tree that's been up there for too long, and my ketubah that has the wrong date of my wedding on it.
No.
So anyway, but like I'll be honest, like that weird package of things is a great example of stuff. There's an aspect of hope that is coming with this inauguration. I think, unlike, I'm not sure we've ever experienced, but certainly haven't experienced in a very long time, there's going to be a sigh of relief and hopefulness that he needs to kind of lean into, right? There's an argument that honestly, the professionals are back. You don't need to worry every single day about what the president is saying anymore. So it's that sense of security in that means, right? So not necessarily defense is what I'm saying, but security in this means that I think is going to be a very key thing. I think, my ketubah is actually out of date because my wedding was postponed this year because of COVID, right?
Right.
So I think another aspect of this, like so many people's lives, from literally taking people's lives to just things being derailed to being in your homes for gosh know how long it's been now. He needs to set himself as a leader in this specific crisis. So not just a general leadership is coming back, and here's my plan in the arguably biggest crisis we've faced in a century. And that, now I'm questioning my history on that specifically, but anyway, very large crisis. I think that is going to have to be a key piece, unlike honestly anything anyone has ever done in a speech. If you think of inauguration speeches, often much like State of the Unions, they're sometimes laundry lists.
Right.
And I think this will be, but this is like, if you're going to focus, if there's a time to focus on something, it is this crisis. And that's going to have to be a bit of this. And then I'm going to throw out my Christmas tree because I'm going with the theme of the stuff behind me is the theme of Joe Biden's inauguration speech.
Sure.
A little joy and hope. There has to be a positive spin to the end of it at the end. It's not just, yes, I'm here, don't worry anymore. It's not just, I have a plan. It's a plan and a path to a better time. And it's going to be about obviously getting out of COVID, getting us back, preventing people from being just at risk every time they go out their door again. But it's also going to be about the economy. It's going to be about success in every people's lives. It's going to be about, student debt, how we're handling, it's got to be hopeful in so many different ways in the end. The entire message has to be America isn't out. We're on the rise. We're continuing to be on the rise. I don't know how I managed to thematically set my background to Joe Biden's inaugural address, but I'm going to pat myself on the back of that a little bit.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah. A lot of this is like, I imagine more people are going to be listening than ever before. And it is a reminder to all leaders about what crisis does to people. They are yearning for leadership, for comfort, for words and messages that will assure them that tomorrow is going to be better. And it's the same thing with your employees, with your coworkers, honestly, and how we interact with each other as well. But like, people in times of crisis are looking for someone reaching out their hand to help. And it's something that every leader should keep in mind.
Awesome. That's a great way to end. I appreciate your time, Phil.
Of course. Anytime, bro.